Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Father-Son Packers podcast, your source for Packers news, notes, and analysis. My name is Tommy, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, my dad, Matt. Dad, how you doing?
Doing well. Back home.
Out of the
cool
heat.
Weather here.
Yep.
Out of the heat. We were in some serious heat last week, 100 degrees, but now we're back in the Bay Area, Northern California.
No longer melting like the Wicked Witch of the West. No longer just turning into a puddle.
Actually, the best thing was when people were throwing water on us.
That's fair. Once it gets to that heat, I can't hang it. I really can't hang anything over 90, but 100, man, that's tough. I mean, at least it was a dry heat, right?
It was a good dry dehydrating heat.
That's the thing. Everyone always says, "Oh, it's just a dry heat." It's like that's still pretty
damn
hot.
So is an oven.
Yeah, exactly. It's like that's still not great for me, at least. But I will say having it be really humid would be worse. So fair enough. But 100 degrees is 100 degrees. But anyway, we are not here to talk about the weather today, although,
we did already.
But we are here today to talk a little bit about the Packers. Training camp is 10 days away, so we are almost to, real live practices and reports coming out from that. So that's really exciting. That's starting on the 22nd for the Packers. Beyond that, though, we really don't have much news surrounding Green Bay. We're still waiting to see if the Jordan Love contract is going to get done before training camp. Dad, reading reports that are out there, what are your feelings on that? Do you think it's going to get done before training camp? I'm hoping so, but I'm starting to feel a little less optimistic.
Well, I mean, the number of days left to actually do it is diminishing. So I'm guessing it's going to be more like a week into training camp, not quite before, but early in training camp. That's my uninformed, totally wild, pulled out of you-know-where guess.
Adam Schefter reported that Jordan Love might not show up to camp if he doesn't have a deal.
I haven't heard that yet.
I couldn't tell if it was a report or if it was him speculating.
That might be speculation.
So that one I'm not sure. But what are your thoughts on that? Do you think if there is not a deal done, do you think he will, maybe not be there?
I'd say there's a reasonable chance that that happens if he doesn't have the deal yet. That he might just wait it out a week or so, and then it'll get done a week or half a week into camp.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised, and I wouldn't hold it against him, but I feel like he would have not gone to OTAs if that was the case. Although, a lot may have changed in a few months. These negotiations can get a little contentious sometimes. But, yeah. I guess we'll see.
Yeah. You could also make the argument that, okay, as the season gets closer and closer and closer, the urgency rises to, put a little pressure on. So we'll see. We'll know soon enough if it's going to be signed before camp starts.
Yeah, and I really hope it does. That's all I'm going to say. Is I really hope it gets done before camp, and we don't need to worry about this. Give him whatever number he wants.
Right. Is it going to start with a 6 now?
That is an interesting question. I don't think so, though. I don't think it's going to start with a 6.
More like 57, 58.
I don't think we're going to get anyone starting with a 6 until next offseason. Or unless Dak signs this offseason. That's the thing. I'm wondering if he's waiting for Tua and Dak, and he's just going to be like, just take the next deal after the next one.
See, I think Dak might not sign until the next offseason. He's got a very weird situation where he has a no tag clause, and he can kind of dictate what he wants. But Tua, they might be waiting for Tua. I'm waiting for Tua because I know I want more money than Tua, so I'm not going to let him sign after me.
Hey, that's the passing yards leader per game. I think it's like passing yards leader per game over the past few years. So, hey, Tua. Yeah, but fair enough. There was a report, though, that Dak was saying they've had some talks in the past few weeks about a possible extension. But, Jerry World, who knows what's going on there?
Who knows what's going on there?
But anyway, So not a whole lot to talk about on the football field right now until next week. But we did have, something that we thought would be an interesting look because, in the past 3-4 months, a lot of NFL analysts, a lot of, podcasters in the space have kind of picked Green Bay as a bit of a dark horse, competitive, contender for the Super Bowl. And we wanted to look at where Green Bay would have to improve, what thresholds Green Bay would have to hit to be a Super Bowl team. Because obviously, for us, it's not a Super Bowl or bust season in terms of if they don't win the Super Bowl, it's considered a failure of a season. I don't think you feel that way, right, Dad? I don't feel that way.
That's right. I don't feel that way. But I think we've got a nice window opening, a nice multi-season window opening up to be a competitor.
Hopefully. Fingers crossed, knock on wood. But the reason that we wanted to take a look at these Super Bowl teams is because clearly the Packers feel like they're on that track. Because if you look at some quotes from players this offseason, Josh Jacobs, newly added running back, quote, this is from Sports Illustrated, quote, "You've got a lot of hungry players out there right now on both sides of the field. Young guys that are talented and trying to make that next step in the league for themselves. And as a team, trying to make that next step, obviously, to Super Bowl," end quote. So you got guys like Josh Jacobs talking about it. Keyshawn Nixon, quote, "We let a team off the hook last year in the playoffs, and we know that. Everybody on this team is here for a mission, and we're ready to win a Super Bowl," end quote. So we got guys like Josh Jacobs on the offense, Keyshawn Nixon on the defense, some leaders in this team, some older vets on the team. I think we've heard Jordan Love mention that that's a goal for him this season. We've heard other players talk about how that's like what they're striving for after, kind of blowing a game a bit against San Francisco last year, where you had it in your grasp and you just kind of made a few too many mistakes down the end of the game. And so obviously, when you're a team that last year didn't have a lot of expectations, last year won 9 games, maybe it can feel a little bit, presumptuous or over aggressive to be talking about Super Bowl, but clearly the Packers players are talking about it. So we wanted to take a look at what the Super Bowl teams looked like. We looked at teams over the last 10 years that either won or were the runner-up in the Super Bowl. So teams that played in the Super Bowl, 20 teams. And we wanted to look at what thresholds the Packers would have to hit to be like those teams. And so it's like, can they get by with like the 15th best defense? Can they get by with, a special teams that's below 25, et cetera, et cetera. So we wanted to take a look at all of these teams that played in the Super Bowl over the last 10 years and see how Green Bay stacks up against them. So, Dad, anything I left out in terms of describing what we were going for in this one, or should we just hop into it and talk about the offense? We'll talk about the teams a little bit really quick, just in case you forget. So last season, obviously, was Chiefs-Niners. Season before was Chiefs-Eagles. Season before that was Rams-Bengals. Season before that was Tampa Bay versus the Chiefs. Season before that was Chiefs over the Niners. Season before that was
Patriots
over the Rams. Yep. Season before that was Eagles over the Patriots. Season before that was Patriots over the Falcons. Season before that was Broncos over the Panthers. And then season before that was Patriots over the Seahawks. So those are the last 10 Super Bowls. So taking all 20 of those teams and looking at where they stacked up. Now, we just picked we were going to look at DVOA, but unfortunately, FTN doesn't have DVOA going back before 2020. So what we ended up doing was just their rankings by PFF grade within that season, including regular season and postseason games, and just seeing where they ranked amongst the other teams. PFF grades aren't perfect, but looking at their rankings relative to one another is usually pretty good because they're usually consistent in their methodology in assigning these grades. So at least ranking within PFF grade is at least something.
Right, with the general premise of how good do you have to be in different parts of your team to both make it to a Super Bowl or win a Super Bowl.
Exactly. So do you want to start us off on the offensive side of the ball, looking at how good the Packers, passing game, running game, et cetera, overall offense would have to be for them to be considered, in this subset of teams?
Right. So let's start with the offense and start overall. So I looked at total offense, passing offense, rushing offense, and also pass blocking, run blocking, and then QB. Figuring like QB can be an important single position to be worth looking at. So let's start with the total offense. And for the teams that won the Super Bowl, so out of those 10 teams, 5 of the teams were ranked in the top 5 in total offense by PFF. And only 2 teams were outside of the top 10 by PFF offense grade. The biggest outlier being the 2016 Denver Broncos, where they were 21st. So they weren't even in the top 20. That was a very, strange where the defense was, looked so good, and Peyton Manning's arm had basically fallen off by that point.
I mean, he had gotten benched mid-season in that one, so that's a very, that's because they were putting Brock Osweiler in the regular season, and then once the playoffs came around, they're all right, back to Peyton. Okay.
Because I saw, looking at the snap counts, Osweiler maybe had just 10% or fewer snaps than Manning. He had a decent chunk.
And that's one of the best defenses we have seen, is that Broncos one. That was DeMarcus Ware and Von Miller, and they're DeMarcus Ware at the end of his prime, but Von Miller in his prime. That was a very, very strong defense.
Yeah. And so the median offense for Super Bowl winners, those 10 Super Bowls, was 5.5. And this is the ranking,
Yeah,
a rank of 5.
Ranking out of 32 teams.
Out of 32 teams.
Yeah.
Right. So then for all Super Bowl teams, winners and losers, so winners and runner-ups, 13 out of the 20 were in the top 5. Only 3 out of 20 were outside the top 8. And a median of 4. So the median actually got better when you include the runners-up. And the biggest outlier, of course, is still Denver by a country mile.
Yeah, and so it seems like, from those numbers, you're going to need an elite offense to, be competing for a Super Bowl. And last year, how did the Packers stack up? Were they close to that? How much do they need to improve to get there in overall offense?
Yeah. So last year, they were 9th in the league by PFF in overall offense, and that's for the whole season plus postseason. Now, I couldn't, for the whole team rankings, parse out the improvement that the Packers offense had in the second half of the year. But they're kind of in the neighborhood, at least being in the top 10, because that's the vast majority of the teams are in the top 10. So they at least qualify there. And perhaps in the second half of the year, they would have, if that is the true measure of where they were after they, Love got his feet under him, being a first-year starter and everything, what we expect coming this year, maybe they would actually more like a top 5 team. So they're in the conversation, not disqualified by, I think, the total offense.
Yeah, and then so what does that look like when you're looking at passing offense? Because I think,
right.
I actually feel better about this when we get to rushing offense. I'm like, okay, what's the worst we can be at running the ball? But let's look at passing offense next and how these teams stacked up, because I would imagine that most of these teams competing for a Super Bowl would have pretty elite passing offenses and pretty good quarterbacks as well, right?
Yeah. So this is where you really see the emphasis. For the Super Bowl winners, 9 of the 10 teams were top 5 by PFF passing offense. The one team that wasn't, the one team that was outside the top 5 was Denver.
Yep.
At 22. So everybody's top 5 except for Denver, who was 22nd in the league that year.
They're just doing it their own way. They're just doing their own thing out there.
Yeah, and the median was 4th. So a lot of teams are around 5, but to get the median to 4, a lot of teams in the 4 and 5. So yeah, elite passing offense for Super Bowl winners. We look at winners plus runner-ups. Then you have 15 of the top 20 teams are top 5 with a median of 4, and only 4 of the top 20 were outside the top 7 in PFF passing grade. And again, of course, the biggest outlier was Denver in 2016. And there were, a couple teams that were 11th and 17th, I think.
Yeah.
In overall.
And so for that passing offense, I think that the takeaway is you need to be able to throw the ball. You just need to be able to throw the ball.
You need to be an elite passing offense.
Yeah. And I mean, the fact that, only 4 of the 20 teams that played in the Super Bowl were outside of the top 7 in passing offense. I mean, that's pretty insane. So at least. Yeah.
The other teams, there's you had San Francisco at 10th when they were runner up
in 2019. Yeah.
And 13th. And Seattle was 14th when they lost to the Patriots.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and so it's a prerequisite. You have to be an elite. You don't have. I mean, obviously, we're seeing with Denver. So, for instance, with Denver, like you said, they're much lower in the offense. They were around in the teens. But just to throw some stuff out there, just to not want to spoil it or anything. But the 2015 Denver Broncos ranked 1st in defense, 1st in rushing defense, 2nd in pass rush, and 3rd in coverage out of 32 teams. So if you're going to have an offense that's even an average offense, you need to have a absolutely ridiculously elite defense that's top 3 in every single metric. So that's just something to keep in mind. It's the threshold for offense is you just need to be 16th. And there are some teams that have won the Super Bowl that way. Yes, there are, but unless you're projecting Jeff Hafley to be a wizard, which, that would be awesome. I'd be super down. But it's a much harder way to win. There's a lot less margin for error. So it does seem like that elite passing offense, that elite offense is necessary. But speaking about
especially that elite passing offense, where you really have to be up at the upper echelon, unless you have an historically good defense and kind of probably a lot of things that have to fall your way as well. Having the ball, was it snapped over Cam Newton's head?
No. The Cam Newton one, he got strip sacked by Von Miller and then didn't dive on it. The one you're thinking of was the 2013 Super Bowl where the ball got snapped over Peyton Manning's head on like the second play of the game.
Okay.
And then it was just a 45-7 blowout the rest of the way or something like that. It was a
okay.
massive
I'm conflating different Super Bowls. That was a long time ago.
But Broncos played in both ones, so that was, there's a connection there. But so speaking about an elite passing offense and kind of how an elite offense is necessary, an elite passing offense is most likely necessary. Where do the Packers? So we talked about where the Packers stand up there. But for an elite passing offense, how does that break down between the quarterback play and the pass blocking? Or do you need to be elite in both?
Well, I'll just say the Packers were 7th last year in passing offense.
Okay.
And so that's a little bit outside the top 5, but if you go, it's a very different.
I was going to say, if you fudge the numbers, if you play with the numbers until the Packers are top 5, they're top 5,
If you pick this 1 week,
yeah,
but it's not really that bad.
No, I know it's
not.
Actually,
it's
the second half of the year. Yeah.
It's even more than the second half of the year. It's like the last, so they played, 19 games? It's like the last 12 games of the season. I think.
I mean, it's a bigger
sample.
sample.
I think it gets them into like 3rd or something, though it's hard to do with PFF.
More good games than bad games. I mean, 12-7. So, but yeah, so speaking of passing offense and needing that to be elite, though, how does that break down between the quarterback play and the pass blocking? Do you need both to be elite, or?
Generally, do you want me to do that next, or the rushing offense?
No, let's look at how the passing offense breaks down into quarterback play and pass blocking, and see if we need to be elite in both, or if we can kind of fudge our way through it.
So let's go to pass blocking first. That looks like it's not quite as stringent, where the number of teams that were elite in pass blocking, so top 5, only 1 out of 10. And then 6 total were in the top 10. And the worst was New England in 2015, who was 30th. And the median is 8.5. So you have one team that was really bad at it. Only one team that you say was elite. And then, a little bit more than half were in the top 10. Now for the Super Bowl participants, winners and losers, 3 teams out of 20 were in the top 5. Half of the teams were in the top 10. So 10 of the 20 were in the top 10. And 5 of the 20 were worse than 20th, with a median of 10.5.
See, that's a lot lower than I would have guessed, because I would have thought going into this that you'd probably need elite pass blocking, especially if you're going to need an elite passing game. But it's...
Yes, so that was a little surprising to me as well. And last year, the Packers were 10th. So with these numbers, it's kind of hard to be disqualified with any number for the pass blocking grade. Or rank, I should say.
The median was 10.5 of all Super Bowl participants, and the Packers are sitting right there at 10. Obviously, we would like to see them. I was going to say, obviously that means they make the Super Bowl. No, obviously we would like to see them improve in that facet, but it doesn't seem like if they played last year how they did, or if they played this year how they did last year, rather, that it would be prohibitive to them, like being a contender, being competitive in that kind of echelon. So beyond that, though, so we looked at the pass blocking. It seems like that doesn't need to be elite. I'm imagining then that the quarterback play probably needs to be pretty up there, I'm guessing.
Yeah, so if we look at the QB, the ranks of the starting quarterbacks for these Super Bowl teams, for Super Bowl winners, 7 of the 10 teams had a QB ranked in the top 5 for the season by PFF. And 8 of the teams were in the top 10. So only 2 were not in the top 10. One was, of course, as we mentioned, Peyton Manning in 2016, who was 27th.
Yeah, and that's the 2015-2016 season. The Super Bowl played in 2016, but the 2015 season.
That's
for
correct.
Reference.
Yes, I'm giving numbers for when the year the Super Bowl was played, not what most people would call the season, which also I had to keep track of when I was making my spreadsheets.
I would have made at least 2 or 3 F-ups with that one. But
it's like, okay, wait, what year am I looking at again? Because I have my spreadsheet 2024 for last season, but in a lot of the databases, they call it 2023.
Mom just hears you mumbling to yourself, what year is it? It's like, you okay? You all right in there?
What year is it? Andre Dawson?
Andre Dawson? But anyway, continue. So 8 of the 10 in the top 10. And then, the Broncos a little bit lower.
Only one team over 20.
And that was those Broncos, that 2015, 2016
Broncos.
Yeah, which we've established super elite defense. So if you're going to be poor on the quarterback, you're going to need to be making up for it other places. And how did the Packers last year? I mean, obviously we all hope Love can make that next step, but it's sounding like he's going to need to make that next step for the Packers to go where they want to go.
Yeah, and I should mention the only other team that wasn't in the top 10 there is this kind of that weird Eagles season with Nick Foles.
Yeah, that's a weird season. That's a really weird season.
That's like a kind of an outlier. He was 18th, so that's kind of a strange outlier because it was only like part of the season. Wentz was actually pretty good.
Yeah, Wentz. That was the year that Wentz was like borderline an MVP candidate before he got hurt.
Yeah. So, but I went with Foles because he was the one who actually played the Super Bowl. Yeah, and so that's you get some wonky kind of rankings, I think, from that one.
And also for the fact that Foles was having an out of body experience and was not playing like Nick Foles. I mean, we've seen Nick Foles, but that was. I mean, he threw for what, like 300 plus yards and multiple touchdowns, like, and then back-to-back playoff games, just like blacked out. Like, I still don't know what happened.
Who was the spirit that possessed him during that playoff run?
I do not know. Spirit Johnny Unitas or something. Who knows? But no, it's crazy. It was a crazy run for Nick Foles. Shout out to him. But yeah, so how did the Packers stack up there last year, though? If Love just played exactly the same as he did,
just talking about like the other participants, the winners and the losers.
Oh yes, sorry, I cut you off there. My bad.
So for the top 5 ranked, there were 13 out of 20 by PFF ranking, and then also in the top 10, only Manning in 2016 finished over 20. Again, had the same issue, and the median for the Super Bowl, both the Super Bowl winners and the Super Bowl participants was fourth, a ranking of 4.
Yeah. So it's almost a necessity to be at least in that top 5, or at very least in that top 10.
Yeah, you really need to be in that top 10, preferably in the top 5, just to make it to the Super Bowl. So how did Love stack up? So last year, for the whole season, he was 14th for PFF. But we know. And people have talked a lot about this. This has been a topic of conversation, and a way that we're all optimistically thinking about it. From week 8 through the end of the playoffs, he was the 5th best QB overall by PFF, though the number 1 QB for passing grade in PFF. So overall, I took the overall offense for all these QBs. I should mention, I took their overall offensive grade, not just their passing grade.
Yeah, and what's happening there, folks, is like the reason he'd be lower is just think about fumbles. So the fumble he had against Chicago, like that's a pretty negatively graded play, and so that's rushing. And rushing as well. But that's why it would be lower than the passing.
Yeah, but I wanted to give credit to quarterbacks who are important rushers for their team. So that boosts some Super Bowl quarterbacks like Jalen Hurts, for example. So I wanted to include that bit of their game. Now, if we just look from so week 8 to the end of the season, he was the 5th best quarterback. I mentioned that part, but then also just look at some other metrics, see if he's how much he's getting into the top 5. Over these same last 12 games of the season, he was first in NFL passer rating, first in total touchdowns, first in fewest interceptions, and so obviously the best in touchdown interception ratio, with his ratio being 7.7 touchdowns to interception, compared to the next best was Lamar Jackson at 5.7. So for lots of different metrics in that last, actually 2/3, not even last half, last 2/3 of the season, he was in the top 5, and in many of them, number 1.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and that's of course what we expect this coming year.
Yeah, top 1 and not top 2 and not 2. But so if he continues playing like he did in the second half of the year, it feels like we're going to hit those thresholds we need to hit at that quarterback play. And, median of 4 for, fourth ranked, that is, for these quarterbacks that are playing in the Super Bowl. I mean, it's obviously a high bar to hit. There are obviously a lot of great quarterbacks in the year, or in the NFL rather. But I do think it is doable there, but it's going to require, more consistency from everyone, more consistency from Love in terms of general accuracy, especially deep ball accuracy. We saw in the beginning of the year last year, they really struggled to hit on the deep ball. And the more consistency. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, yeah, he was missing Musgrave. He was missing Watson. Also, his deep balls in the first 7-8 weeks of the season.
And then obviously more consistency from, the pass blocking all the way to, the receivers running the right routes is always usually a good thing. But I think that right there, like in the passing offense, like I was saying earlier, I feel pretty confident in the passing offense from what we saw at the end of last year. Pass blocking we saw didn't need to be elite, but the running game is still something that we're obviously a little bit, a little wary of. So how did the running game and the run blocking look for these Super Bowl teams, and was it a necessity to have it?
So this gets weird, I must admit. So for the rushing offense, the Super Bowl winners, top 5 ranked rushing offense by PFF, precisely 0 teams out of 10 were in the top 5 in running offense.
0.
2 teams, 2 out of the 10 were in the top 10, and 3 teams were between 11 and 20. So half of the teams were ranked in the 20s. 5 of the 10 teams of the Super Bowl winners were ranked in the top in the 20s
for overall running offense.
Overall running offense by PFF, with a median rank of 20.5.
Wow.
The worst rankings were the 2018 Patriots at 26th in PFF rush grade. So if anything, it was better not to invest too much in the run game.
That's kind of the takeaway there, is that maybe it's more of just a correlation between hey, if you're going to have an elite running offense, you probably don't have the resources to put into an elite passing offense. And so if you got to pick one, you got to pick passing. And so the running will fall down a little bit. But it does seem like you don't necessarily need an elite running game to be a contender based on those numbers. Yeah.
So if you look at the Super Bowl participants, winners and losers, you get a few more. You get a few in the top 10, 3 out of 20. So 3 of the 10 runners up were in the top 5.
So if you want to lose a Super Bowl, invest in the running game is what you're saying.
And 5 of the and 5, were in the bottom 20. But so none of the runners up were in the bottom ranked worse than 20. And the median for the Super Bowl teams participants was 12th when you include the runners up. So it brings it down from a median of 20.5 to a median of 12 when you include the runners. Yeah. So if you want to finish runner up, get to the Super Bowl and not win it.
Yeah, really invest in that running. I do think obviously a little bit noisy. You're probably picking up some noise there from the 2 Niners teams, and remember, this is a small sample size, only having 20 teams to look through. But the further back you go, the less representative it is of modern football. Like a team in 2000, I'm sure they were very highly ranked in the run game, but like we see here, that just doesn't translate as much to modern NFL. But yeah, so I'm guessing it's the Niners, and the Rams were those 3 top running teams. Maybe the Panthers, actually, if you just look at the Cam Newton running, probably too. But beyond that, though, I do think it does say something that, maybe you just have to choose between elite running and elite passing, and you should probably always choose elite passing, which we kind of know at this point. But
yeah, so the 3 teams who were the top 5 of the runners up: Niners, and Seahawks.
Oh, yeah, okay, Marshawn Lynch. That makes sense.
Yeah, and they were number 1 that year.
And if they had known
they had handed the ball off,
I was going to say,
and stuck to their strengths, then they would have been
known they were an elite running game, they would have won. And you could argue that the Niners both times probably could have ran the ball a little bit more as well. So there is that. But so that's
to their guns.
That's the running game. I'm guessing that the run blocking is pretty similar. That's also not necessarily. Also, sorry, where were the Packers last year in terms of that? Do we hit the median of 20? Are we at least there?
So last year in rushing offense, the Packers were 10th.
Okay,
for the whole season.
We might be a little too good, honestly. We're getting a little dicey. But no, I'm just kidding. But anyway, and then for run blocking, I'm guessing it's pretty similar.
This is where it gets weird. So for the run blocking, so not the overall rushing grade, but the run blocking grade, 3 of the top 10 teams who are winners were in the top 5.
Wow. Okay, that's a lot of numbers right there. So, okay, out of those 10 teams that won the Super Bowl in the last 10 years, 3 were in the top 5 of run blocking, even though almost none of them were actually good at running the football. Okay,
even though 0 were actually in the top 10 in rushing offense. So for run blocking, 3 are in the top 10, and half of them 3 of the top 5, and half of them were in the top 10. And 0 teams were over 20.
Okay, so I think what's happening there probably is that you need an elite offensive line of some kind, and then the elite offensive lines are probably like if they're really good at pass blocking, they're also probably pretty good at run blocking. And then you probably just didn't invest in running back at all and just kind of like took the L there. I'm guessing that's like guessing that's the signal that we're capturing.
I didn't go down to look at like running back grades for those teams. That would have been taken.
Yeah, I'm guessing that's the signal that we're capturing, though. Wouldn't you say? Like, is that you should have an elite offensive line?
You need to have a good offensive line.
Yeah, and so what about when you're looking at the both? Oh, yeah, the median. Then when you're looking at
the median was then 10.5 for the Super Bowl winners. And if you look at both teams, 9 out of the 20 were in the top 5, and 11 out of the 20 were in the top 10. So about half. Not that many between 6 and 10. And no teams again were worse than 20th. So this is actually, different than the pass blocking. You got a couple teams who are worse than 20th in pass blocking, and the majority of teams who are worse than 20th in overall rushing offense.
Yeah,
and a median, and for those 20 teams, all Super Bowl participants, the median was 8.
Okay, and then last year the Packers were, I'm going to guess, in the teens somewhere.
23rd.
Oh, yeah. No, that tracks. They were not good at run blocking last
23rd in run blocking, and so. This is the only one where they're caught so far on the offense where they're outside of the range.
Yeah,
where no teams who won the Super Bowl were worse than 20. Actually, no teams who were participating in the Super Bowl were worse than 20. There were 2 teams who were 20, and the Packers were 23rd.
Yeah, and so just to kind of round up the offensive section, it seems like our main takeaways are you need an elite quarterback / elite passing game. The running game is kind of, it's not a necessity, but you need to have a really good offensive line as well. And so kind of taking all of that together, how do you feel about those necessities, elite passing game, elite quarterback, really good offensive line? How do you feel about that in the context of Green Bay?
I think Green Bay is pretty well situated for everything except the run blocking.
Oh, I was going to say just the line overall.
Well, I think their pass blocking has been good.
That's true.
Especially as a whole unit. But maybe one thing that you miss that maybe this is capturing is your ability to get push in crucial short yardage situations in terms of run blocking. That is the thing that so far the Packers have not shown to be very good at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And maybe that's one thing, that's something we're looking to see if they get better at this year.
Yeah, I think definitely of those three things that you really need, like elite passing game, elite quarterback, and like really good offensive line. I think the offensive line is definitely the thing that I have the most question marks about now, seeing as we don't even really know who the starters are. And we talked about this earlier, and we didn't even really mention that. Are we sure Zach Tom's going to be back to, Zach Tom level? Is he going to be playing at that same level he played at last year after coming off a torn pec? We can't be sure. So that's something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, I suppose there's always going to be a little bit of worry, but by the time the season starts, he's going to be like 8 months out or 7 months out from the tear.
That's true.
They expect him ready by training. We'll see. We'll see at the beginning of training camp how close he is to going.
Yeah, and we'll know that in about 10 days. So keep an eye on that. But anyway, anything else you wanted to touch on the offensive side of the ball before we pivot over to defense? Because I think this has some interesting stuff in there as well.
Yeah. I guess if we're in a world where Zach Tom isn't ready to play at full level, then things get kind of scary on the offensive line fast.
Very dicey. I think you almost have to go Morgan
Elton, at tackle,
Myers as someone at right guard, and then probably Walker at right tackle. I don't know. It's definitely going to be something to keep an eye on if Tom isn't ready, but hopefully he is. Fingers crossed, knock on wood, all that good stuff. But let's move over to the defensive side of the football, because this was a bit surprising to me. They say defense wins championships, and they're not wrong. Looking at total defense, so starting with just big picture, million foot view, just overall total defense of the last 10 Super Bowl winners, 8 of the 10 were ranked in the top 5, and 5 of the 10 were ranked in the top 2. So
that actually surprises me a little bit, because I had thought that the narrative had gone to, well, that's those times in the past. Yep. And now offense matters. But I guess not if you want to win the whole thing.
Yeah, not if you want to win the whole thing. Yeah. And to be fair, looking at the last 5 years, only 3 of the last 5 were in the top 5. But that's still,
that's still really 3 of 5.
Yeah, still 3 of 5. But anyway, so 8 of the 10 of the last 10 Super Bowl winners were in the top 5. 5 of the 10 were in the top 2, with a median over the winners of 2.5. That's kind of crazy.
That's our lowest median for anything so far.
Yeah. The biggest outlier was the 2019 Chiefs, who had the 25th best defense. So that's a massive outlier when you look at that. But if you look at the 2019 Chiefs offense, Dad, they were pretty elite, and they had an overall offensive rank of 6. So they were a pretty good offensive team, and obviously Patrick Mahomes at the height of his powers.
Right.
But
and their passing offense was elite.
Yeah. But so the defenses have been really elite, except for that 2019 Chiefs. And then when you look at just all Super Bowl teams, so 20 of them, 14 of the 20 were in the top 5 in defense with a median of 3.5. And the outlier is still that 2019 Chiefs team. So you need to have a really good defense, moral of the story. And you need to have an even better defense than I realized you need to have. Like, you need to have a super, super top 3, top 2, like elite defense to like.
And I'm now looking ahead to your notes on where the Packers were last year, and it gives me gives me a headache.
The Packers last year were 20th, which is not as bad as the 2019 Chiefs, so it's doable. But you need to do a lot of things right, and even that 2019 Chiefs team was like. Steve Spagnuolo knew how to turn the knobs in the playoffs, if you remember. And then Chris Jones just took over a lot. So they had some elite pieces
and
that took
was
over.
Mahomes' best season?
No, I would say no. Statistically, I would say 2018 was his best season.
Oh, 2018.
When he threw for 5,000 yards and 50 touchdowns.
Okay. I was off by absurd. A year. It was the year before when they were the runners-up.
Isn't it crazy? His first year as a starter, he threw for 5,000 yards and 50 touchdowns.
Yeah, it was kind of bonkers.
That's absurd. We should.
And then their offensive line was decimated by the time they got to the Super Bowl.
No, that was a different one. That was 2018. Was the year that D Ford jumped off sides and gave the Patriots a first down.
Sorry, they lost to the Patriots.
Yeah, and they gave up that first down, and then I think the overtime rule screwed them, where the Patrick Mahomes never got the ball. Yeah,
I hate that rule.
Yep,
the rule sucks.
But the fact, point of evidence. Their defense let them down there. But so that's what you need. And last year, the Packers defense was 20th. And so that's a really big mountain to climb to get all the way to top 5, where you almost certainly need to be.
Put all our faith in
Jeff Hafley.
Jeff Hafley in the role of Sir Edmund Hillary.
It's gonna
climbing that mountain.
I did not get that reference even a little bit. That was
okay.
Way over.
What
my
if
head.
I include Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay? Let's be fair.
That's what are you talking about? Anyway,
first 2 people to climb Mount Everest.
Okay, that's such a pull. I was never ever gonna. I mean, I could have guessed, but anyway. So, moral of the story: you need an elite defense to be in the Super Bowl. Now, what did that defense look like for these teams? So I kind of have it broken down to pass rush, coverage, and run defense. So let's look at the run defense first. So for the Super Bowl winners, 3 of the last 10 were in the top 5, and 4 of the last 10 were in the top 10, with a median of 11. So run defense wasn't exactly a super premium. Some of these teams had really good run defenses. The worst, though, was, once again, the 2019 Chiefs, who were 32nd. Dead last in run defense.
There's hope.
That was going to say,
dead last.
We can do it, I believe. But anyway, so run defense, not really a deal breaker with that median of 11. If you look at all the Super Bowl teams, so out of 20, 3 of the 20 were in the top 5. So none of the runner-ups were in the top 5. 4 of 20 were in the top 10, at the median of 14.5. The Chiefs are still the lowest, but there is not actually an obvious outlier there when you're looking at all those 20 teams. There are a lot of teams that are ranked in the 20s. So the Packers last year were 21st. So that's well within your range of outcomes of, making the Super Bowl. So I'm actually, surprisingly, not that concerned about the run defense when I'm looking at it there. Now, any thoughts on that, Dad, on the run defense? I mean, it just seems like, obviously we saw on offense, passing is the most important, and it seems like it's going to be stopping the pass is the most important on defense, huh? That,
based on the overall defense and the run defense, it seems like that it must be the pass defense that has to be good.
Yeah. So the point is, a team who was dead last in run defense was able to win the Super Bowl, and they weren't a good defense overall, and they're not really a representative of the overall sample. But for the most part, with a median of 11 for winners and a median of 14.5, out of 32 for the all teams, the winners and the losers, run defense is obviously at least somewhat important, but not the most important thing, and can probably be, you probably invest other places.
Yeah, and the media is basically middle of the pack.
Yeah, which is expected value for the median. Moving over, though, to the passing defense, though, because I think this is where it's more interesting. Let's start with the pass rush. So, Super Bowl winners. 3 out of the 10 were in the top 5 in pass rush, and 5 out of the 10 were in the top 10. But I think even more interestingly is that 3 of the 10 were below 20 in pass rush, which is in pass rush ranking, which is kind of wild to me because I would have thought you'd need an elite pass rush there, especially looking at overall defense. And so the median of these teams, of the Super Bowl winners, was 11.5 in pass rush, with the lowest being, again, the 2019 Chiefs, who were 30th. They just did not have a good defense and survived a lot on, the offense, and then star players turning up when they really needed them to. When you look at all the Super Bowl teams, though, for pass rush, 8 of the 20 were top 5, 9 of the 20 were top 10, and 6 out of the 20 were below 20s, and the median of 9, and still the 2019 Chiefs were that biggest outlier. But, it seems like pass rush, obviously a good thing to have. Some of these, a good chunk of them, half the teams were in the top 10, but it wasn't necessarily a requirement for these teams on defense. And last year, the Packers were 16th. So they're obviously below the median of the winners, which was 11.5, and below the median of Super Bowl participants, which was 9. But that feels like a jump that seems that they could reasonably hit, right?
I think so, especially if you consider the sort of change in philosophy to allow the interior defensive linemen to concentrate on rushing the passer and not just sort of holding up to double teams, so shoot the gap and go attack in the backfield rather than
and I think we're
kind of hold their ground. So I think, and they have several linemen who have added, that's their strength, like Wyatt and Brooks.
And I think you could simply get maybe some regression there on Wyatt, converting some more of those pressures to sacks, and you get a little bit of just natural regression there. You maybe bump up just 3 or 4 spots just with that.
Yeah, and plus you feel like you have a Gary further removed from his ACL reconstruction, and so maybe you'll get a full season of top production instead of him like running out of gas perhaps and tailing off at the end of the year.
Yeah, and then so this brings us finally to coverage, where this actually was very interesting to me. So, Super Bowl winners. 7 of the 10 Super Bowl winners were in the top 5 in coverage. 7 of the 10 were in the top 10, so same thing, with a median of 3. And the lowest of the Super Bowl winners was the 2019 Chiefs once again, but they were only 16th. So even the team with the bad defense still had a pretty okay coverage group. And then when you look at all the Super Bowl participants, 13 of the 20 were top 5, and 15 of the 20 were top 10, with a median of 3.5, and the lowest is still that 16th. So it seems like you really need elite coverage, and probably some of that is you need to be taking the ball away, and you need to be taking the ball away probably at a pretty high clip. So with the Packers last year, they were 18th. That's a big jump to make, but the thing is, that is Jeff Hafley's area of expertise. He is a secondary guy, and we did add McKinney, and hopefully we're getting Stokes back. And so that's and where I think
I would say we completely remade the safety room. It's just completely redone compared to last year.
Exactly. And so that's where I think I'm going to be keeping my eye on the most in this, on this team, especially in training camp, is that secondary, because we talked about, run defense, kind of not necessarily, it's good to have, but it's not necessarily a requirement. Pass rush, it's once again even more important than run defense, but there were some teams that got by without it. But coverage seemed to be the thing that the most of these Super Bowl defenses had in common. It was that they had elite coverage groups. And I think that's where the Packers have made the most changes. That's where the Packers have made a lot of investments this offseason. And that's, I think, maybe highlighted by their choice in defensive coordinator. But that's going to be, I think, where the Packers are going to need to improve the most, because a median of 3.5 for these Super Bowl winners and then Super Bowl participants, respectively, that's a really high number. Like that's a big goal to hit.
Yeah, and you hear this narrative lately about how coverage is more important than pass rush for a number of years now,
which I don't necessarily. I don't really agree.
The data,
but the data does say coverage.
This data suggests that that's actually real.
So, okay, question just about the data and just what you think. How much of that is like just is noise capturing the signal of it's important to turn the ball over? Like where it's just like, it's important to have a lot of turnovers. And a lot of the times the secondary will be the ones doing that.
It's hard to tell. I mean, we'd
Yeah.
have to dive deeper in the data to see whether or not the reason for these elite coverage grades is driven by interceptions.
Yeah, and another thing to keep in mind is, none of these groups are playing in a vacuum. The coverage is dependent on the pass rush. The pass rush is dependent on the coverage. Being able to stop the run helps you get into advantageous, like, third and longs and getting good pass rush situations. So none of these things are happening, independently. And that's, I think, another important thing to keep in mind. But it does seem like that coverage is going to be a major focus for Green Bay, getting that up to the standard of these other Super Bowl teams if they want to get to where, Keyshawn Nixon, Josh Jacobs, etc., other players have talked about where the goal this year is getting to that Super Bowl. Anything else on the defense that you wanted to touch on, Dad, or should I just do a quick little special teams run?
Yeah, it just seems like they want to get into the top 10.
Yeah,
at least.
I think at the least you need to be in the
top 10.
At
least
the
you need to be in the top 10? Yeah.
Because even the worst one, and we were talking about, the 2019 Chiefs, they were 32nd. They were 30th. Even the 2019 Chiefs had the 16th best ranked secondary. Like, that's that, and that was a bad, not a bad defense, but a bad, most of the season was not a good defense until the playoffs when they kind of kicked it into gear.
Right. And the take home was like, well, maybe you can do it once in 10 years.
Yeah.
But the odds are not forever in your favor.
No, they are not. And so kind of wrapping things up here, obviously, the defense we saw is the pass defense is the most important thing. Overall defense is very important, though. Honestly, I thought that it seemed like the overall defense numbers were more concentrated in that top 5, top 10 than even the offense was, which was a little surprising to me, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it wasn't even, a lot of it wasn't even top 10. It was top 5.
Yeah, it was top 2. 5 of the 10 were top 2 in defense. Like, okay, that's insane. But wrapping it up here, just to figure we do special teams really quick.
Because you can't resist.
I mean, I will never.
Because we know that at least special teams can torpedo your playoffs.
Yeah, it's cost them twice. But so far, the Super Bowl winners, 5 of the 10 were in the top 5 in special teams, but only one of the last 4 Super Bowl winners. So something to keep in mind. 6 of the 10 were in the top 10, but only one of the last 4 was in the top 10 with a median of 6. The outlier, though, 2020 Buccaneers were 30th. So you just it's doable with a horrible special teams. It is doable, but you still probably need a top 10, top third of the league unit there. Looking at all Super Bowl teams, 6 of the 20 were in the top 5, 8 of the 20 were in the top 10, and a median of 14.5. Not as many outliers. The special teams of the losers were pretty bad, is kind of what that was looking at. But
so you can have a bad special teams and lose in the Super Bowl,
and maybe that's the argument, is that that's the it's a game of inches. That's the margins that you're playing with. But so Packers last year were 28th. That's above what the worst one was, but they're going to need to make a big jump if they want to be,
How about instead of ranking special teams based on actual performance, we say, what is your typical rank for special teams coordinator salary? Do you need to be in the top 5?
Man, it's something, huh? But anyway, so that's been the special teams. Packers kind of need to move up there. I mean, even the median of 14.5 feels miles away. It feels so far away.
Yeah, double our quality.
Yeah, to get to the average, the middle ground of what these Super Bowl teams have on the special teams. But it can be done with a very poor special teams is at least a bit of, it's something. It's a little solace there. That was the word I was looking for. Thank you. But anyway, Dan, anything on the special teams you want to touch on, or should we wrap up here?
I guess I have more hope for the defense improving than I do for the special teams improving.
Oh yeah. I mean, we've made changes on defense. The special teams, we're running back exactly the same unit. Have we changed anything on special teams? No. I mean, we have Tyler Davis back,
and we have our biggest investment. Well, we'll see if Carlson keeps his job.
That's the thing is I think the only
a long snapper. Maybe
the hope I have is a better long snapper, because Orzik was terrible last year. I'm sorry, but he was just flat out bad. And shout out to Danny Whelan for getting some of those snaps down, because he was fighting for his life. But a new long snapper and maybe growth from Carlson from year 1 to year 2 is I think the best case scenario for the Packers special teams.
It is the best case scenario.
Yeah. But anyway, so this has been our, what do the Packers have to do to be in that Super Bowl conversation like they want to be episode. If you like what you heard here today, I realize I didn't pitch this at the front, but come give us a follow on Twitter at FatherSonPacker. We tweet out whenever we have new episodes out. And then subscribe on your podcast platform of choice, whether that's, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. We even put all our episodes up on YouTube as well. And then if you follow us on Twitter, once again, that's at FatherSonPacker, you'll also see, we tweet out stats from these episodes, stats from when we're doing research. We also retweet, any Packers news, whether that's roster moves, coaching hires, etc. And then, any content from other Packers content creators that we just think is interesting. But anyway, once again, that's at FatherSonPacker on Twitter. Thank you so much for listening. We'll still be doing an episode every single week for the rest of the offseason, and then we'll be doing 2 episodes a week during the season. So, keep your eyes on that feed. And until next time, go Pack, go.
Go Pack, go.